Call the regular meeting of the Shelton City Council to order for June 4th, 2019. Please all rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for attending tonight. Donna, would you call roll, please?
Yes. Councilmember Dorsey.
Here.
Councilmember Anesco.
Here.
Councilmember Kranz.
Here.
Mayor Rogers.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Peterson.
Here.
Councilmember McDowell.
Present.
Councilmember Schmidt.
Here.
Okay, I know we have one change to the agenda tonight. Before we get to that, any other change of the agenda from the council?
No.
Okay, City Manager.
Do have one late change for you tonight, Council. We had some issues at the wastewater treatment plant and the MBR plant due to the power outage that I'm sure a lot of us experienced last night, and we have some numbers and things to address that, and would like Council to concur to place that on the action agenda this evening as the last item, and we can discuss the facts at that time.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Any questions for Jeff before we decide to put it on the action agenda? Okay, do we have concurrence to place that on the action agenda?
Yes.
Okay, it's concurred, so we'll place it at the end. Is that okay, Jeff?
The end is just fine, item number 6.
Okay. All right. So we'll proceed with council reports, and I will start with Council Member Schmidt, please.
Good evening. Unfortunately, I missed the last business meeting. Appreciate the excusal there, but not much to report since then. And now, next week will be the EDC board meeting, and I will be attending that, as well as the joint council commission meeting on the 11th. Looking forward to that as well, and I appreciate staff helping facilitate that conversation, and looking forward to meeting with our friends across the street here. So,
Thank you.
Councilmember McDowell.
Councilmember Dow.
I helped with fill the truck up on Mountain View, which was interesting. I attended a broadband for all out at the PUD with Derek Kilmer. Went to the cemetery on Memorial Day and was there for the service, which was very, very nice. I attended the retirement party for Dr. Yu, Mason County Health Doctor. Briefing with Jeff, Forest Festival Parade, left board meeting this morning, Women's Republican lunch on Friday, and the joint meeting next week. That's
Thank
my
you.
schedule.
Deputy Mayor.
Outside of my regular meetings, I had 2 constituent meetings last week and met separately with Mayor Rogers to discuss some items of committees moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Last week, I attended the memorial service at the Memorial Park, and I was honored to be asked to speak. Upcoming weeks, I have a Mason County Housing Authority meeting tomorrow. We'll probably attend the Quixote Community's open house on the 13th, I believe, for the Veterans Village. And then we have the joint meeting with the county next week, as Councilmember Schmidt mentioned. Councilmember McDowell, or Kantz, I'm sorry.
Well, I changed my name to Councilmember McDowell.
It's okay.
Well, it's been really a busy month, but I did also was at the memorial service at the cemetery. Week after next, I will be at my criminal justice board meeting. At the 11th, it looks like we're having a joint county city meeting, and I plan to attend that. I didn't know about the 13th, but I will write that into my schedule book, and so that concludes my report.
Councilmember Nisco.
Outside our briefings or meetings, I will be attending the joint city council and county commissioner meeting, which we've been waiting probably a year for. At least I have. Had a great time this weekend in the parade, watching the parade after we got off our truck, the Forest Festival rides, and what else did we do there?
8 hot dogs.
Yeah, had a great time. It was a great, car show, excuse me. Car show was great. Got a little sunburn peeling, but I'll live.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Dorsey?
Well, along with what most of everybody has already mentioned, did anybody mention the AWC coming up at the end of the month? Okay, so we have that at the end of the month. We're all gonna go to Spokane. Last week I was gone with my grandkids down to Disneyland, and we were all sick. That wasn't much fun. But anyway, and then coming up, I have my Mason Transit Authority meeting coming up on the third Tuesday.
Okay, thank you. Are you going to address the commute?
I can do that.
Now, or you want to address it in your report?
I can do that now if that works, Mr. Mayor.
Why don't we do that now?
Okay. So Coyote Communities, as part of the Veterans Village project, has approached the city, and they are going to be putting together a standing advisory committee to address issues as part of the community development and also its ongoing operation. And they have asked the city to appoint a council member to be a part of that committee. And what I'd like to discuss here tonight is if council would like to appoint a member, and if so, then we will bring the appointment back to the full council meeting on our next regular meeting, June 18th.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So what's the consensus of the group? Have a city council member be a representative on the local veterans home village,
I think it's a good idea.
okay? Others?
I'd like to add to that, though, not only a member on their committee, but also similar to what we do for, like we'll have this evening, the chamber, the LTAC groups, where they're the historical, where they're giving us a kind of a quarterly update. I would simply request that that be handled the same way from the Coyote Communities group. So,
Okay.
so have them present to us some defined components of a quarterly briefing, and I think that the council should kind of deliberate on what we would like to hear back, things like occupancy, any, residency issues or non, just to be able to report back on those topics, and also give that the public forum, also put them in the public forum similarly that we do for the others that are providing quarterly updates to the council as well.
I know we had something required in the lease. I can't
Yes.
remember the timing
I
of that.
believe it was an
it
annual.
or, but,
Yeah, I agree with that. They
Yeah.
should come and give us a report.
so the city council rep would
Yeah.
bring that message. Yeah, I think that initially, I think quarterly would be good, so. Okay, so you, with that understanding, your concurrence with putting a rep on their
Yes.
local board, okay? Anyone else? Okay, I'm seeing nodding heads, so I assume we will appoint someone to that board, and we'll talk about who that is next meeting,
We will have that on your agenda for June 18th.
okay? So if anyone who's interested, please let me know now or in the upcoming week, okay? All right, thanks, Jeff.
Yep.
Okay, we hit our first general public comment period. We ask everyone to come forward. They have 3 minutes. Identify yourself and whether you live in the city of Shelton or not. Has anyone signed up for the first general
Yes, I
comment
have
period?
one. I have Patricia Vandehay.
Patricia. Pardon me.
Patricia Vandehay, and I live in Fawn Lake, although I don't know what difference that makes. It is very difficult to make comments or judgments about ongoing projects when there is no currently written information presented for verification and/or understanding of what is, or will be done. At the commissioners' meetings, information is not given to the public before the presentation is given, and no printed material is available even after the presentation. This is not the proper way to enlighten the public as to the course of action being taken, and certainly not conducive to public participation, which I believe is considered an important element in government work and responsibility in decision-making. Therefore, what I am speaking about is information from the past, in-depth reading and asking questions about the last 30 years. 3 minutes is not enough time to sometimes state your information that you want to get across. It used to be 5 minutes. I don't know why it was reduced. They always are talking about public participation is so important, but when we try to participate in it, we get cut off. So I think that something should be done about it, and it should be changed.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, move on to our consent agenda. Has everyone read the consent agenda?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda, consent agenda as published?
I move to approve the consent agenda as published.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, the consent agenda is accepted as published. Okay, next, we're gonna have a couple presentations from our Lodging Tax Advisory Committee supported groups. First presentation is Heidi McCutcheon from the Mason County Shelton Chamber of Commerce on their first quarter LTAC report. Heidi?
Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members, thank you for the opportunity to partner with you to provide visitor information services for the city of Shelton. This report in particular is on first quarter tourism. Our Facebook page has more than 2,500 fans. It's a way we continuously share news, events, and information. As you can see here, our top post for first quarter was about the temporary closure of Olympic Highway North. Reached nearly 4,500 unique users and more than 8,000 total impressions, so getting the word out there for you guys. That was followed by a post celebrating the Chamber's annual award gala winners, which received only about 60% of those views that the city has posted. Our reach by city continues to be led, of course, by Shelton, Washington. A second coming in from Olympia, and then Belfair, Union, Seattle, and Grapeview. Again, we're very proud of the fact that there's outerlying areas that are looking to us for information on what's happening in Shelton and Mason County. Our visitor centers, we run several. As you can imagine, with snowpocalypse in February, the visitor count was down quite a bit. So we're down about 25% for the year. However, the numbers for second quarter look fantastic. So phone calls also decreased during that time. And our website and calendar, looking at quarter one, you can see that we received about 92% new visitors. And our top page outside of the landing page is for the community calendar. We published another issue of our Business Matters magazine in late March. This is a 40-page publication that's included in the journal subscription, as well as copies available at businesses throughout Mason County, visitor centers, etc. We don't use any tourism funding for this, but we do see a benefit to Mason County's business community by getting this information out there. As you can see, again, one of the articles that we had was about the city construction projects that everybody's looking forward to being complete at the end of summer. So are there any questions?
Any questions for Heidi? Hearing none. Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi.
Next, we have Liz Arbaugh from the Mason County Historical Society's Museum, again with the first quarter LTAC report. Liz?
Mayor Rogers, Deputy Mayor, Council, I want to thank you so much for your continued support of the Mason County Museum. We've had an eventful first quarter. Our director, Kristen Fabry, resigned to stay home with her kids. And my name is Liz Arbaugh, and I'm the new director. My family and I moved to Shelton about 18 years ago when we found and fell in love with this great old house. But it wasn't just the house, it was also the historic downtown, the library, all of those things. And then since we moved here, of course, then it's the people that make this place so great. I also have a strong interest in historic preservation and I served 2 terms on the City of Shelton's Historic Preservation Board in the mid-2000s. So you might be hearing more from me about that later down the road sometime. Anyway, I started as a volunteer at the museum about 3 years ago, and then I was hired onto the staff about 2.5 years ago. I realized pretty soon that I knew nothing about how to run a museum, and so I have been enrolled in the, excuse me, in the Museum Studies program at the University of Washington. And I just finished that on Saturday, so I'm happy about that. Now, I have the credentials, but the staff there has the expertise. We have a combined experience of about 43 years working there. They're all Shelton High School graduates, and they've moved away and have come back again. Shirley Earhart, the class of 1948, has been there for 20 years, and Jan Parker, who you probably know from the articles in the Mason County Journal, you know, they're just tremendous resources. And if you have a question and they don't know the answer, then they can probably find it for you, because they are relentless. We also have wonderful volunteers that have contributed about 178 hours during our first quarter. I was really surprised when I first started working at the museum. I had no idea that you get so many people from all over the place coming in. And some come to just look around. They're asking directions. They're asking how do they get to the water? Where should we eat? Where do we get a good cup of coffee that's not Starbucks? So, you know, we've tried to put together some resources for them. For the first quarter, despite the horrible weather, we've had 512 visitors, 124 from out of town, 32 from out of state, and we've had 7 people from out of the country. We've hosted a couple of events. We had Felix Benell come and do a properly timed talk about extreme weather in February, and then Don Trosper from the Olympia Tumwater Foundation talked about the Olympia Brewery and then the history of Tumwater. A presentation by Mike Fredson about John Turno had to be rescheduled due to the bad weather. I'm really working to increase our exposure throughout the county. We recently installed a small exhibit at the Alderbrook Resort about Ori Nobles and Olympus Manor, and with a label encouraging people to come and see the museum. In fact, today, I put it on Facebook, and today we had someone come from Winlock who didn't realize that we had that information about him, and she knew him when she was a child, so that was really great. We're also redoing a brochure to highlight the charms of our downtown location. Our Facebook page has just under 3,000 followers, and our post containing photos from the early Mason County storms had close to 1,000 reactions. Our next program is the 22nd of June with Mark Wojtowicz, and he's going to give a talk about his book, Where Waterfalls and Wild Things Are, which is available at the museum, and it should be an entertaining presentation. And I know some of the council have come to our programs in the past, and I invite you all to come and visit us and get acquainted. And thank you so much for your continued support.
Excellent.
What time will that be?
It is at 2 o'clock. Yeah.
Questions for Liz?
Oh, I was just going to ask how your database is going, and that was always a big part of your.
It is going well. You know, we have, our artifacts are pretty much all entered in. It's just a continuing process because we get donations all the time.
Now, is that something that's on a website that's open to the public? That they can look at?
No, it's not available to the public, but, you know, anyone is welcome to come in and we can help them find, you know, research whatever they're interested in.
Councilmember Brown.
I just want to thank you very much for stepping in and filling that position, because we like the other lady, Kristen, you know, and whenever a position gets vacant, it's always good to have a member from the public come in and fill that role and stuff. So we'll welcome you to that position and hope that we can work with you on helping that museum be #1.
Right, thank you.
All right.
Other questions for Liz? I have a couple, Liz.
Yes.
The display out at Alderbrook.
Yes.
Are you going to be able to have a permanent spot out there, or is this just a one-time?
I think it will be an ongoing relationship.
Okay.
We don't know exactly what it's going to look like at this point. But they are, when I set it up on Friday or Thursday, I guess, we were talking about, they have a lot of places that they can display things, and then we can rotate things through. That's
be
the
really
plan.
nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so too.
And then the car show is coming up
And
on
the
the
car
30th,
show
right?
is June 30th, Sunday, all day, yeah, so.
Okay. Great, thank you very much. Okay. Next group of agenda items are business agenda. Has anyone signed up on any of those items? Thanks, Donna. So our first item is Community Development Director Mark Ziegler has information about a real estate agreement. Mark?
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I'm bringing to you today a listing agreement for the property at 120 West Nealon Street. This property was surplus to the city needs back in November of 2018 with the intent on eventually listing it for sale. So we've received a draft agreement from Richard Beckman Realty Group, who is under contract with the City of Shelton for real estate broker services. And with your concurrence, we'd ask that you place this on the June 18th council action agenda.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Mark?
Just a note, the proposed contract they sent over has a June 10th listing date. I assume that will be amended since we won't get to it until the
Certainly,
18th.
yes.
And it'll just be a matter of tidying that up.
Other questions?
Um,
Councilmember Schmidt?
On page 1 of 3 relating to the listing price, I just was interested in the council's feelings at $35,000 for the listing price.
I have my feelings. I think Mark can maybe add some.
I shouldn't say feelings. I don't care about your feelings,
Well.
Mayor.
What is,
That is what you asked, however.
I know. Let me rephrase that. Are we comfortable with the $35,000 listing price? And can you give us a little bit of background why, where that? Because I recall Councilmember Cron's talking about this a while back, and so.
In my conversations with the broker, they will determine the price or fair market value or what the listing price might be based on comparables and comparable
Okay.
properties that have sold within, a reasonable amount of time in the current market. So I reached out to him, asked him for some more specifics, if some of the utility connections would come into play, and essentially,
Okay.
the comment was, it could. We're not
Okay.
quite sure. We could list it at a higher price if there was a passion from the city to do that. They would list it at the price that the city requested them to list it at. But certainly, this is the price that
Okay.
they believe is the best comparable at this time.
okay.
With all those businesses around it, is it commercial or residential?
It's in the CRV zone, so it can be residential, but on the second floor or above.
Okay.
Excuse me, downtown zone. Sorry,
Downtown zone
I
could be-
misspoke. I
could be
misspoke.
both, correct?
Correct, exactly right. Yeah, but again, residential above doesn't require on-site parking.
I'm sure it's in the agreement, but is this, if there's offer at the listing price, we may still refuse the offer, is that correct?
Correct.
Yes, okay.
How many, if it was obviously apartment units, how many units could go on that land?
Depends on the design. There was 8 units in the
Was it?
previous apartments that were there some time ago. But again, depends on design. If they're studios, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, whatever that might be. And then obviously how tall somebody would like to build.
Any other questions for Mark?
No, but I think the price is a little low.
Is there a height limit to the building within the city limits?
There are, depending on the zones, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So How high
exactly.
can they go there?
I believe it's 35 feet in that zone.
That was being discussed this morning. Curious to find out.
Okay, I've heard one
Well,
council member said it's too low. I imply from Joe's question, I would think it's too low, but it may expand interest in the property versus turning people off.
I'm kind of torn because I've been screaming for 8 years that it's worth more money because of but this is the first I've heard it's only 8 units that was there before.
Correct.
And again, a water and sewer hookup is grandfathered, and that fee is grandfathered in on that square chunk of property. Is that a true statement or not a true statement?
General facility charges would not be charged to a parcel that utilities have already been connected to. They had a 1-inch meter previously. If the development required a larger meter, then the general facility charges would be charged at that point. But if they used a 1-inch meter that was in place at that time, those GFCs would not be charged for water and sewer.
The difference between the two.
Right,
So if they had a 1-inch meter and they were going to a 2, it would be the difference between the two sizes.
but there would be a reduction. Is that sewer also? I mean, water and sewer hookups, are we talking both, or, so there would be a less than if that lot never had 8 units on it before. Can you describe that a little bit clearer? Because I think that's my confusion, is I think that if 8 hookups were included in the price of those hookups would be far more than $35,000.
Our
So-
current policy says if the service size increases, the applicant will be required to pay applicable GFC for the service size requested.
So that's the,
So the way I interpret that policy is that if you put a 1-inch meter in, you're not responsible for the hookups for the water service. And the sewer service presumably, and there's 8 services
Right.
there. But if you were to put a 2-inch meter in, or 1.5 or whatever, you would have to pay the full amount, not just the difference between the two.
And is that because the building would be larger for a bigger meter?
Well, it could be, and I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine that the building codes that the building that was there previously was built under are significantly different than they are today, and that any new construction would require sprinklers, which generally requires an upsized meter.
Or whatever commercial use might be there, if you
Right.
put in a laundromat, might require a greater water meter service.
Okay.
I guess my last thoughts is we could micromanage this thing to death, and I thought it was worth a lot more myself, but they're the realtors, we've hired them to do
Yeah.
the job, we want to sell the property. I tend to think I would just let it go, and if somebody gets, if somebody didn't put 8 or more units in there, then it wouldn't be worth much more than a regular city lot, because there is no real parking with it. So maybe they know a lot more than we know on that, I don't know. So I think I would vote that we just push it forward.
Councilmember Schmidt?
just to put a bow on that whole original, why I even brought it up, I just was wanting to ensure that
Yeah.
all of that was factored in, and again, trust the staff and the, our realtor to set the price and sell the property, so.
Okay, so your consensus, move it ahead as written,
Move it ahead.
okay?
Move it.
Yep.
Right? Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay, next, Public Works Director Craig Gregory is going to speak to us about the chip seal project. Craig?
Thanks, Mayor, council members. Bring forward to you tonight, contract for chip seal services. We've identified several roadways within the area of North Mountain View to be chip sealed. They are heavier used roads in that area, and we've identified the corridor between Olympic Highway North and Shelton Springs Road on Wallace, and also Shelton Springs Road from 13th out to the city limits as Schedule A within this bid packet. Schedule B on 13th Street between Olympic Highway North and K Street, and Schedule C, which was 13th Street between K Street and the four-way stop or Wallace-Neelan Boulevard. At this time, with the current budgeted amount of $200,000, with the bids that we got in for responsive bids, the low bidder was Sierra Santa Fe at $224,894 for Schedules A and B only. Schedule C was significantly more and quite a bit over budget, so we pared that back to bring to you tonight to just do Schedule A and B. With also the hospital needing to do some chip seal to cover up some work that they did out within the roadway, part of an agreement that we made with them quite some time ago with the expansion of the hospital. Their portion within that they have agreed to pay for within this contract would be just over $11,000 that would come off of that $224,000 number, bringing it down to right in the neighborhood of 213,000, a little over budget for this year. But just keep in mind, also, we did budget within the transportation fund this year, $225,000 for the residential blocks for paving. So what we would propose is to take the additional $13,000 to cover this contract out of those residential blocks and put it towards this chip seal contract. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have moving forward.
Thanks, Craig. Questions for Craig? Councilmember
Just
Smith?
a question relating to the crack sealing portion. Is that all being handled by the contractor? Do they do that prior, do they do that like a few weeks prior? Do they do that just immediately prior to doing the chip seal work?
They try to do it quite a ways before the chip
Right.
sealing. It is done by the contractor.
Okay.
It's actually a sub that is going to be doing that from them. Likely a ply line would be doing the crack sealing, but it really should be done a good month in advance of the actual chip sealing itself. There's not a lot on this one.
Right.
We did identify quite a few of them that we looked at that really weren't candidates for crack sealing. What we did was identified those spots that were allocated a little too much to do crack sealing, to be a little too labor intensive. So we identified a second shot of chip seal. So basically they would coat the wheel pass or any place where it was cracked with one shot of chip seal and then chip seal the entire roadway over the top of that to seal those up. We did identify a small portion on 13th in Schedule B, but not much within the rest of the project limits. And that was the suggestion of a couple of the different contractors that we had take a look at this project as a method to seal up some of those cracks before we actually go into chip seal.
I had a question on the crack, so it's not specifically listed in the schedule, but it will be completed by the contractor.
That's correct. It is identified, there's a quantity within the bid packet that identified chip seal, or I mean crack seal, sorry.
Yeah, I see it. Okay, sorry. Okay.
So it doesn't really define areas. Basically, they're gonna come in, take a look at it in any of those spots that they would need to. That's why we identified a certain quantity that we thought would be used for that.
Other questions for Craig?
Yeah, and how long does about the chip seal work? Is that like a 10-year? I mean, it's not a guarantee, I'm sure, but.
You're talking wearing of the chip seal?
About 10-year wear?
On a road like that, collectors through arterials, you're probably looking at a 5 to 7 year
5 to 7.
wear rate. I would say on Wallace Nealon, you're probably looking at the lower of the two, somewhere around 5 years.
Yeah.
On that roadway, maybe on 13th, you might get upwards of 7 or 8 years, just pure volume of traffic on those roadways.
Right. Well, as much as I'm all for paving 20 more sections of city streets, I think it would be wise to maybe do 15 and put some money over on taking care of what we got. But that's my opinion. As that's gotten us in trouble before.
You are absolutely correct.
I am? All right.
Yes.
And I'd agree as well. I think when we look at this, and I'm not trying to put the brakes on this particular project necessarily this year, but looking at chip sealing where we have maybe lower traffic, lower truck volume, and shifting those funds, to a full permanent fix, those capital funds potentially. On those corridors like the Wallace Nealon, and I understand that there's the larger projects that we hope to get, but I definitely would also like to see us explore chip sealing in residential neighborhoods where it makes sense. It doesn't make sense everywhere, but there's definitely, you definitely get a little bit more bang for your buck, going that route, but definitely the higher traveled areas. So I would agree with Councilmember Dorsey's comment there, so.
So just respond real quickly to that. With the road rating that we just completed, finished up with, there is a fairly low volume of residential streets that are eligible for chip seal. We don't have a lot of them that have been paved recently in residential areas. And most of the streets that are older, over that, 10 to 15 year range, most of those would be a HMA asphalt overlay instead of a chip seal. They're just too far gone. Where some of our other projects, especially on the arterial streets like Wallace Nealon, that haven't been in place for, a super long time, that maybe just have some cracks that need to be sealed up, those are the ones that are really eligible for chip seal. In particular, not a lot of our residential roads are at a grade where we could go in and do a chip seal over the top of them. They would be more of a thin overlay in those residential areas. So kind of just looking at that and looking at the numbers after we finished up with the road rating, that's kind of what I saw. Had a feel for that to start with and thought maybe that was the case, but after we finished that up, it really confirmed that that was the case, that a lot of our residential streets are older and really haven't been maintained much or overlaid, other than over the past about decade. We've been trying to do, a certain volume over the last 7 to 10 years that we have done some residential roads.
And we're still doing residential blocks, just not probably as many. Correct?
Right now, we've got $225,000 budgeted for
And we're gonna,
residential blocks.
okay.
And we are, we are going to use that money as efficiently as possible by concentrating all those residential blocks in one area of the city rather than scattered in different areas. So more efficient use of those funds.
And through the road rating, like Jeff said, through the road rating, we have identified our most needed area, which at this point has been identified as West Mountain View area of town. It's been neglected the most. It's got the most roads that need some sort of overlay, and we have identified that and are gonna cluster those together to be more cost effective.
Anything with SATSUP?
With
Keep
SATSUP,
getting phone calls with SATSUP. Is it SATSUP? Right off of Fairmont?
gravel part of
Right,
SATSUP?
Yes. They said that it's a little bit more dusty now than it used to be. You put something different down this time.
I think SATSUP, that dirt part of SATSUP has, if I remember right, 3 houses on it. It's a fairly short chunk. Again, it's one of those roadways that's,
No, it's a long road.
what's that?
It's a long road. It's like a mile road. I walked it yesterday, day before yesterday. It's more than 3 houses.
Mile Road of SATSUP?
Maybe is it Puget then?
It's Puget.
Puget, sorry,
yeah.
wrong side of town.
Puget is a completely different beast.
Yes.
Puget is in Sewer Basin 4, which is our next sewer basin to be completed by staff's recommendation. It's one of those roadways that has right-of-way issues. It's only about a half a road that's actually platted. So we've got some other issues there. It is a maintenance nightmare. It's on a hill section that then levels off and planes off into a very flat roadway, which is difficult to maintain. Drainage is difficult on it. But that is one of those ones in Basin 4 that we would hate to go right now and do some sort of paving on that roadway and then tear it up a year or 2 from now when we go in to do Basin 4.
That's an answer.
Great question, couple questions. One is, there's mobilization in each schedule.
Correct.
So was this bid each one independently? So
It
they could
was-
have been awarded Schedule A, or Schedule B, or Schedule C independently?
Or any combination.
Or any
That's correct.
combination of, okay.
That's correct.
So-
And that's typical.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm wondering about the mobilization cost.
typical for a contractor for mobilization, yeah.
Yeah, but how he bid it, just moving into one project, now he's gonna get two projects, you think the mobilization cost would be different, but that's just a question. And then, your or not your recommendation, but as written, it's Schedule C is out, which is 13th.
From K Street to.
Right, that
Walls.
segment of the K, of 13th. Is that gonna, would that be high priority if and when we do another chip seal project in town, like next year? That would be probably the first one to come up?
That would be my recommendation, is
Okay.
to stick with the arterials and collector streets
Okay.
for chip seal, and identify those ones that we are going to lose as far as a grading goes, so that they fall below that level where all of a sudden now we have to go in and put HMA over those, which is much more expensive. So that would be my recommendation, is to continue to put that money towards arterial and collector streets to save the ones that are within that range of above a 70 PCI, so that we can continue to maintain those and we don't run into those very costly overlays or grind and mill and fill type activities.
Okay.
Because anytime you do that, it just drives the price sky high.
And our best estimate, that segment of 13th, if we did it next year, would still be same process?
I would
Same
guess,
treatment.
depending on, we can never account
Yeah, I
for
understand.
freeze thaws. If we get a winter where it's very wet and it's very cold, I can't tell you what that roadway would do under those conditions, but what we've seen in the past, I would say that it will certainly stand up for another year.
Okay.
Could you
Deputy Mayor?
briefly address the fog seal that's listed in here and kind of how that works within the maintenance program? And the second part of that being, would there be an opportunity to extend that to any other areas to extend the life of some of those? I know it's one of the more cost-effective measures for preventative maintenance. Do you maybe just talk a little bit about what that is and how it's being implemented here?
So really, a fog seal is just to coat the actual, so the way the process goes is oil on the roadway, rock on top of that, and then basically tire rolling that through the process, and then coating all of that rock with a final coat of oil to really just stick all of that material down. Anything that's not swept off, anything that's not loose, really seals it into place with that top fog seal. It can be used for crack sealing. Also, I haven't seen it be very effective in my experience of being a real effective just fog sealing over a roadway as a maintenance alternative. I wouldn't recommend that, but that's been my experience with it. It's really to seal up the chip seal that's down.
Okay. Other questions, comments for Craig?
Just a compliment on what a wonderful job Craig has been involved in the city, and all of this infrastructure projects and things that are going on that, just from my perspective, I think you're just doing a great job. And it'll be nice when it's all done, obviously, but when you go through the kinds of projects that we're going through right now and what it takes to do all that stuff, you just can't snap your fingers and automatically this stuff is done. So from my standpoint, appreciate you and what the boys are doing, and ladies, 100%. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. So consensus to move it forward with Schedules A and B? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. To our next meeting. Okay, thanks, Craig. Okay, next item is back to Craig, information about ordinance to designate truck routes.
Thank you, Mayor, council members again. So I did place a new map, something a little different than what came out in your packets in front of you earlier. It identified a couple of spots, and thank you, Mayor, for pointing a couple of those out that we missed on our map. Just a small section right off of 101 up to the intersection of Wallace Nealon and Olympic Highway North. And also the section just to the east of 13th Street on Wallace Nealon out to the city limits. Just want to point out the interaction between city staff and all of the heavy haulers that we have, not only in Shelton, but that come in from out of the city to service food services, whatever it might be, has been really good. We've reached out to quite a few of them, put it on Facebook and our website. We did conduct a meeting a couple weeks ago, invited all of them in, wanted to hear their concerns, wanted to hear their input to what this map looked like, and what they thought would be the best use of truck routes to get them around within the city limits, trying to keep them out of really the residential areas and keep them on some of those streets that had a better infrastructure to support those larger weights and vehicles. Within that meeting, we had Mason Transit Authority, Mankey Lumber, and also Brady Trucking. We reached out to Green Diamond. We did have the school in at a different meeting. Miles Sand and Gravel, BCP Landscape Supply also, and reached out to all of them and got their input to what this looked like. And this is the map that we propose at this point. You will see the language within the ordinance really defines basically staying on a state highway or a truck route to get to a destination, or if you need to stray off of what is the designated truck route, it's the shortest route between that route and your destination. So this kind of started out with 7th Street and Olympic Highway North, and really trying to eliminate that turning movement from big trucks onto 7th Street, and really morphed into taking a look at a much wider and broader look at truck routes and how we get those larger vehicles through the city of Shelton. Being happy to answer any questions you may have.
I have some questions. Any other questions?
Just one. There's been some conversation over the past many years about Northcliffe as a truck route, and some concern about the burden that's put on the infrastructure there and how that will hold up over time. Can you kind of talk to how we came to this, and if you have any concerns about continuing to utilize that as a truck route?
Northcliffe in particular?
Mm-hmm.
Northcliffe in particular has very good infrastructure. It's got a base layer of asphalt that varies between 5 inches and 10 inches thick. We found that through the project. It has got a ton of asphalt underneath it. Very good infrastructure to carry those heavier weights. And now with the new traffic circle at the bottom at First Street, certainly those movements to get through that intersection are going to be much easier than coming to a stop sign and then a yield sign just after that. It is fairly well used by especially a lot of our bigger haulers. SPI in particular sends a chip truck up and down that every now and again. Brady's Trucking also uses that. But as far as infrastructure goes, I don't have any concerns at all with that roadway holding up to the larger vehicles.
Thank you.
Question on removal of Park Street. So the
Yes.
normal route coming in Matlock Brady will be going down Railroad, and if you're going south on Highway 3, making it right on First Street, would be the preferred route now?
That is not the preferred route.
Okay.
When SPI first came in and presented what they wanted to do, their main route was Highway 3 from the south, down Highway 3 to Mill Street. We still would prefer that to be the route. Any of those logging trucks that are coming in from the west, we would really like to see them use that Highway 3 system, if not that. Coming in on Wallace Nealon and then using Northcliffe down through the traffic circle. But to use 7th Street, which is a very difficult turn to make from Railroad onto 7th, and then basically through a residential neighborhood on Park Street, which has terrible infrastructure. It has got a very thin base layer on very questionable subgrade down in that area. That roadway floats around quite a bit. So any of those, and we did talk to Mankey Lumber and SPI as far as that route and eliminating that. And they indicated to us that none of their logging trucks use that route. They all use Highway 3 down the hill. It's the independent haulers that have been still using that. So they offered to help us spread the word that those independent haulers really need to be using Highway 3 or Wallace Neyland. So they offered to get the word out to any of those independent haulers. But that was really the main crux of that, or focus, is to eliminate that turnoff of Railroad onto 7th Street and then that roadway on Park Street, and eliminate them from going onto that roadway through that residential neighborhood.
Okay, just to clarify, so their normal route coming in Shelton Matlock would be get on 101 and either go south to Highway 3 or north to Wallace Neyland?
Correct.
Okay. And same question on coming in Quilquallum Road.
Quilquallum Road, we did take a look at. We did not identify it as a truck route. Obviously, if you've got somebody coming in on a logging truck in particular, something of that size, coming in from Quilquallum Road, the ordinance does give them the flexibility, if they're coming in on Lake Boulevard, to use that to the closest route to their destination or get to a truck route. So they would be able to use Lake Boulevard down to Highway 3. Just really wanted to try to keep them off of Arcadia Street through that residential neighborhood and getting to Highway 3. So if you've got a logging truck coming in from Quilquallum Road, that would be the definition, is once they hit the city limits, it would be their quickest distance or route between the city limits to a designated truck route, which would be Highway 3.
Okay.
And that was kind of the rationale for not designating that as a truck route in particular, but letting the ordinance language really define, if you're coming in on that roadway, get to a truck route. And that would be the shortest distance, is to use Lake Boulevard to Highway 3.
Okay.
So we're still coming down Highway 3, making a right at the pine tree there, and how many times has that pole been hit? Right there at the pine, to the right turn, are they still making that right turn off of Highway 3, First Street?
Correct.
They're still making that right turn there?
Yes. That's a state highway.
Nothing.
I mean,
Yeah.
as far as a truck route goes, we can't get any better than a state highway. Whether it's an issue or not, as far as turning radius goes, yeah, we understand that. They've tried to move that pole, they've tried to move the signal to the back side of it. Yeah, they've done quite a few different things. It's just a very tight turning radius there.
Yeah, everybody has to back up if they're making a left onto First or.
Yep, absolutely. But again, it's
That's it.
it's Highway 3, all the way to Railroad and then down to Front Street.
Yeah. I can see some feedback coming now when you were talking about Quilquallum Road. I mean, I understand the truck route, I appreciate it, I really do. But if they're coming in from Quilquallum Road and they wanna go to Olympia, they are gonna go on Arcadia Road. Arcadia
Well,
Street.
technically, if they're going to
And then
Olympia,
I'll go right to Highway 3.
technically by the ordinance language, if they're going to Olympia, we don't see that a lot.
Right.
We don't see a lot of trucks that are coming in Quilquallum Road and then going to Olympia. They're coming in and going to downtown. But still within the ordinance language, that would be their shortest route to Highway 3, is to use Arcadia.
Correct.
We would like to discourage that as much as possible, but
Exactly.
technically,
The neighborhood.
they would be following the ordinance. If they were coming in Quilquallum Road going to Olympia, they would use Arcadia to Highway 3.
Yeah.
So, and again, that's really the reason for identifying Franklin and Cedar also downtown, is that gives those heavy haulers, the semis that are going to Safeway, a route and that shortest point to get there without turning on 7th Street, 7th and Alder. It gives them a way to go down through the traffic circle to First,
Right.
hit the state highway, and then get into those feeders into the downtown core. That would be their shortest route. And we are certainly open to, if this council wants to take a look at and sees any issues with this map, we can certainly take a look at Lake Boulevard Arcadia and defining those. Infrastructure-wise, go back to Councilmember Peterson's comment about Northcliffe. Lake Boulevard's a
Fairly
not a brand new,
fairly new.
new to us.
Recent.
Roadway, so it's got pretty decent subgrade, it's got pretty decent HMA on it. So if we want to define that as a truck route, we certainly can. That is certainly up to this council. If they see something that staff has recommended and want to make a change to it, we are certainly open to taking a look at that and making that change for you before we bring it back as an action item next meeting.
I'll just say, Mike, it's not a concern, it's just a comment that we have a major route through town. I'm thinking of Colquhoun to Lake Boulevard to Pioneer, that we know we have truck traffic on. And yeah, they're not violating the ordinance, but if we already know it's a truck route, why don't we designate a truck route? That's my only comment.
Sure.
But as long as they're not violating the ordinance, it's a moot point, unless there's other issues that a truck route will either gain or be a negative in the future. Which I hear
I certainly don't
not.
see it as a negative, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor. Yeah, I think, would you, I guess my question for the council would be, would you also designate Arcadia then? Because if you designate Colquhoun Road without designating Arcadia, then you're gonna have truck traffic that was coming in on Colquhoun. Like Councilmember Dorsey stated, if they're going to Olympia, you're gonna force them to come down to Highway 3 and try and make a very difficult turn
No, I agree.
from Pioneer Way onto Highway 3 heading south. So we might want to look at both Arcadia and Pioneer Way if we're gonna make that change, would be my only suggestion.
I would say if the intent is to try to keep them out of the neighborhoods, designating Arcadia doesn't make a lot of sense, and we can't do one without the other. So at this point, I think that this map is probably, coupled with the language in the ordinance, acceptable to move forward as far as I'm concerned.
Question about 11.06.020. We talk about some pretty specific things related to combinations of truck and tractor and length. We don't talk about weight. We refer to weight, but we don't specify a weight. Because I mean, honestly, that's the issue. It's the weight damaging the roads, the weight of the vehicle, and the combination of the vehicle damaging the roadway surface. That's the intent of the ordinance. It's not to keep trucks out of neighborhoods, it's to prevent damage of the roadway, correct?
That's correct.
But we don't specify like a weight, a minimum, maximum, et cetera. Is that something we should, or is it necessary? I mean, because I also know from an enforceability standpoint, you gotta go weigh the vehicle, right? And that's another thing to have to worry about. And I did have a question about enforcement of this and how we see this rolling out, so.
So I tend to think that being able to measure the truck and, that can give you a pretty good gauge of what it's gonna weigh. If we put a weight limit on there, we would have to have the capability to weigh it in order to enforce what the ordinance says. I think that's basically what it comes down to. Is there another reason that you wanted to mention?
That is exactly it. We would need a set of
Mobile scales.
which I'm not sure that we necessarily want to put out that we don't have at this point. But yeah, that would be an extra cost, and I'm not sure, without having Chief Moody here to answer that question, I'm not sure if his staff is trained or has the ability or time to necessarily go through that. We do have within the fee schedule a heavy haul permit. It's not very well used. We do get quite a few through town, especially on Wallace Nealon, that we do see that should be applying for a heavy haul permit, that they don't. So Jeff hit it right on the head. I think you certainly need the tools to enforce that, and that might be difficult at this point. That's why we did not include it.
That's my
I
problem.
could speak for Chief Moody. I don't think he wants his boys out there doing the scale thing. Just off the top of my head.
Yeah.
One quick question on the The language has combinations over 8 feet in width, comma, over 46 feet in length shall be restricted. Is that comma an and or an or?
Or. It would it would definitely be an or. Anything that's
8 feet wide
width.
or 46
or
feet?
40 feet in length.
Okay.
And we certainly can make that change to clearly identify that. That might be a really good,
I'm not a lawyer.
yes, I fully understand.
And
Yep.
we can
We'll-
have Kathleen look at this too.
Yeah.
see if-
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so I hear consensus to move let's have the reading of the first reading ordinance number 1939-0519.
Ordinance number 1939-0519. An ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, establishing designated truck routes and amending Shelton Municipal Code, Chapter 11.06, relating to size, weight, load regulations, and street closures.
Thank you, Donna. Any further comments or questions? I will make one comment. When we communicate this, make sure it's communicated as these are not, if you see a truck not on these routes, it's not illegal. That would be my concern. So-
Correct. And Mayor, we are required to put up signage identifying the ordinance, and we certainly will post that on the website, the ordinance language.
Okay.
We understand that there are still folks that need to get into those residential neighborhoods, long haulers, things of that sort, that are just going home. We fully understand that.
Okay. All right, so I'll move that forward to second reading on the 18th. Okay, next, back to Craig again. Purchase some equipment for the wastewater treatment plant, additional safety features.
Not only safety features, but also permit requirements that are coming with our new discharge permit. The discharge permit that we have in place now has been expired for over a year. We have been waiting for Department of Ecology to get a new discharge permit put in place. Those are good for 5 years, but we have been working hand in hand with not only DOE to meet or exceed the requirements of the permit that will be issued here shortly, but also Department of Health in relation to our shellfish industry and the requirements that they might have to restrict that closure area or restricted area that we have right now within Oakland Bay and Hammersley Inlet. So working very closely with both of them to meet the requirements that they would have or the wants that they have, especially in particular with Department of Health. And we think we have done that through both of those agencies in what we're proposing here today, which is a fairly large purchase of UV modules. So right now, we've got 6 UV modules, 3 in each channel coming out of the clarifiers. And that would add 1 additional UV module to each one of those channels, bringing the total to 6 bringing the total to 8 from 6. And also the turbidity and UVT monitoring of that effluent that's heading out to the bay through those UV modules. So right now, the budgeted amounts for the 2019 budget was $70,000 for the UV modules and $75,000 for the disinfection monitoring equipment. And at this point, what we're proposing is a $57,000 purchase through the UV modules and a $35,000 purchase for the disinfection, quite a bit under budget. One thing to keep in mind, it's going to cost about $20,000 for installation and also SCADA integration into the system. So there is some additional cost, still well under budget to put these in and actually get them installed. We also are asking for a sole source. One we have in place now for Suez. Suez is the manufacturer of the UV modules. That was done about a year ago. There is no statutory limits on the sole source. But as a department, we like to take a look at those every 2 years, bring those back to the council with justification for a sole source, which really, if you're not familiar with a sole source, it's really looking at it and trying to figure out if there's more than one vendor that can supply that certain piece of equipment. In this case, with the UV module and also the disinfection monitoring, we have identified Suez, which we already have in place with the UV modules as the sole source that's been in place for a year, and also looking for a new sole source from the council for Hatch or Hawk equipment for the disinfection monitoring equipment that will be installed. And really, the simple fact for that is it can be easily integrated into the UV modules that are there now for disinfection, and we have reached out to them. They did provide us a letter that they were the only manufacturer of what could be installed into our system without modifying or changing the system that we have now. So a couple different things today, just the purchase of the actual equipment and then deeming Hawk a sole source for the disinfection monitoring equipment itself.
Okay. Questions for Greg?
We talked about these during our tour, the redundancy, and this kills the Ebola, correct? Is it Ebola?
It really kills
Everything.
everything.
Okay.
I mean, that's coming through there. It's trying to really get that effluent to a point where we can discharge to the bay, so.
Okay. Donna, first reading of resolution number 1146-0519.
Resolution number 1146-0519, a resolution of the City of Shelton, Washington, declaring the purchase of Hawk instruments to be clearly and legitimately limited to a sole source and waiving competitive bidding requirements for such purchases.
Okay, anything further on this? Concur to move it forward? Okay, move it forward to June 18th. Okay, that concludes our business agenda items. Next to action agenda. Anyone signed up?
Yes, I do have one.
Okay, for which topic?
C Street landfill.
Okay, thank you, Donna.
Well,
Okay, our first item is Finance Director Aaron B. Mueller is not here tonight, so we're having Terry Snitzer, our County Manager, speak to us about our first quarter budget amendment. Terry?
Yes, and thank you, Mayor and Council. Aaron wants to extend his apology for not being here tonight to present the ordinance, but he was feeling very under the weather, so he needed to go home. So, but it gives me the opportunity to happily inform you guys that the annual report for the city and for the Shelton Metropolitan Park District was completed and turned in on time last Thursday.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Terry.
And Aaron and Jeff.
But I also want to extend my appreciation to all the departments for getting the information to me in timely fashion in order to pull everything together. But especially I want to thank our customer service staff and the finance team for their everyday hard work to pull everything together to make this an annual report to turn in.
Thank you, Terry.
So, back to the original business here. So we bring to you the 2019 first quarter budget amendment. The 2019 budget was adopted on December 18th of 2018. This amendment includes all fund adjustments to adequately fund operations, recognize current obligations, and adjust for unforeseen expenses. Adjustments include carryovers to account for unspent budget in the prior year for uncompleted projects that will be completed in 2019 and for 2018 expenses paid in 2019. Updates to personnel costs for cost of living adjustments for bargaining unit contracts that were approved after the 2019 budget was adopted, as well as personnel updates for new hires and minor corrections. and recognizing new grant revenue and associated expenses. So has been some adjustments to the original ordinance that we brought to you 2 weeks ago. We wanted to bring to your attention. It's the third paragraph where it says, whereas ordinance number 1935-1218 included both beginning and ending fund balances in the budgeted resource and expenditure appropriation, and whereas the intent of council was to adopt an expenditure appropriation not to include the use of estimated ending fund balance. So we added those to that. And if you go to section 1, you will see that we have the adopted budget column, which includes the estimated fund balances. And then the next column is expenditure authority of what you actually authorized as the expenditures for 2019. And then the next column is the adjustments that have been proposed and the revised expenditure budget, which is the expenditure authority with the adjustments. So this ordinance also includes Exhibit A and B, which are attached to that. Exhibit A just gives you an overview of what is included in the just over $1 million, which $907,000 is planned for transfer of transportation benefit district funds, working capital, and increased general fund contribution to the street fund that was newly created in 2019. A net amount of $86,000, just over $86,000, increases the Human Resource Division by 1 full-time employee for a payroll analyst position, and $45,621 represents various line item budgets that were not included in the adopted budget, but it goes into detail in Exhibit B. For the street fund, just over $20,000, almost $21,000 for $10,000 for concrete panel work, and then additional salary and benefit adjustments for new hires, cost of living increases, labor from the labor agreements. The funding of these items comes to $18,000 in unbudgeted interest revenue, and the balance is $2,851 is from available fund balance. The capital improvement fund is $216,000. A lot of this was from carryover budget appropriation from 2018 for residential block paving. The funding for this item is from available fund balance. And then the water fund, just over $116,000. Carryover budget appropriation from 2018 for well 1 rehab. Design was $90,000 plus $5,590 for the tiny home survey, $20,588 for salary and benefit adjustments for new hires, cost of living and labor agreements again. The funding for these items comes from $53,000 increased interest income and balance. In the balance, $63,700 is from available fund balance. For the sewer fund, $2.9 million is carryover budget appropriation for 2018 for the Basin 3 project, $2.876 million plus $29,973 for salary and benefit adjustments. Funding for the Basin 3 project comes from a DOC, Department of Commerce, grant. For the remaining amounts are funded by increased interest revenue, $46,000. Storm drainage, $10,890. Salary and benefit adjustments, and the expenses funded by an increase in interest revenue of $15,600. Equipment maintenance and rental is $4,083, just salary and benefits. And increase will be paid by increase of interest revenue for $2,000, and then the remaining by fund balance. So, and then in Exhibit B, it explains what is all, or details what makes up those figures. So questions for me?
Thanks, Terry. Questions for Terry?
No?
Seeing none?
And
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I just think it's important to note that changing these so that we are reflecting the council's true intent without those fund balances beginning and end is just a transparency issue. We want to make sure that everybody understands, including the public, where the money comes from and where it's going. And that's really the only change that we were making.
I know I really appreciated when I saw the revised document, so thank you very much. So, all right, second reading of ordinance number 1938-0519.
Ordinance number 1938-0519, an ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, amending the annual budget for the year ending December 31st, 2019.
I move to adopt ordinance 1938-0519, an ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington relating to the 2019 budget.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt ordinance number 1938-0519, an ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington relating to the 2019 budget. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Next, Community Development Director Mark Ziegler has information for us about updating Shelton's municipal code for flood damage protection.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Presenting to you today the action agenda after Senior Planner Dose did a fairly thorough job on May 21st in describing the National Flood Insurance Program. There have been no changes to the ordinance since that time, so I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Otherwise, we'd appreciate a second reading of ordinance number 1937-0519 and a motion to adopt that said ordinance so we can have this flood prevention chapter 18.10 of the Shelton Municipal Code adopted by June 20th, which is the federal requirement through FEMA.
Okay. Any questions tonight for Mark? Okay, Donna, second reading of ordinance number 1937-0519.
Ordinance number 1937-0519, an ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, amending Chapter 18.10 of the Shelton Municipal Code related to flood damage prevention.
Thank you, Donna. Do we have a motion?
I move to adopt ordinance 1937-0519, an ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, updating Shelton Municipal Code, Chapter 18.10 relating to flood damage prevention.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second to adopt ordinance number 1937-0519, an ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, updating Shelton Municipal Code, Chapter 18.10, relating to flood damage prevention. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Mark,
Thank you.
and thanks, Jason.
Yeah.
Pass on.
Next, we'll have an update on the C Street landfill from Director Gregory.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Not a lot to update you on in the first half of 2019. Data transmittal from Aspect Consultants outlining the documents that they submitted to Department of Ecology on the city's behalf back in March. And the reason for not a lot of activity or update, at least on this update, is they are very close to submitting an action plan to Department of Ecology for assessment by them. So we should have quite a bit more information for you at the end of the year at the next update, if not sooner when those things become available. All of this is updated on the city website per the agreed order. One thing I guess to note, it does say on your document in front of you that the final signatures from DOE for the agreement extending the expiration date of the funds to June 30th of 2021. We did receive those yesterday. Fairly lengthy process with them to get through that, but we did finally get through it and receive that yesterday. So That is finalized, and we have until 2021 to expend those. We're hoping that we aren't out that far, and we'll have a cleanup plan and an action plan by the end of the year. So should be a much better update for you towards the end of the year when we do get that into Department of Ecology for review.
Okay. We have public comment on this
Yes.
action item?
Patricia Van de Hay.
In the last 30 years, there's been study after study after study after study about the very dangerous contamination and every other sort of pollution this landfill holds. One of the most poisonous contaminants is the dioxin 2378 TCDD. It was one of the chemicals used in Agent Orange in the Vietnam War. This was brought in by Simpson when they hauled truckload after truckload after truckload of ash and dumped it everywhere, and everywhere in Shelton Hills, mostly at the C Street landfill. The maximum contaminant level for this form of dioxin in soil is 3 to 11 parts per trillion. When Herrera did a dioxin study at Oakland Bay and Shelton Harbor and surrounding area, they also took samples of the ash from Simpson's boilers, and they had readings of 4,200 parts per trillion. This is what they were hauling up to Shelton Hills. Simpson sold the mill and left the mess. Why isn't the city going after Simpson to pay for the cleanup? Why are the taxpayers stuck with this mess? And yes, I know the city is getting a grant, but this is also taxpayer money. The Department of Ecology is of no use, as they issued agreed orders, one for Goose Lake and surrounding area, and one for the C Street landfill on April 25th, 2001, and never enforced them. Shelton Hills will never be developed until all that contamination is cleaned up. It is only 18 years since the agreed orders were enacted, and very little, very, very little has been done in accomplishing anything. Also noted on the charts given in the latest information, I noticed that instead of the 3 to 11 parts per trillion, there was a different figure being used, 30 PG-L. I'm unfamiliar with this, so I don't know how close it is to the relationship to the maximum contaminant level. It is so difficult to try to understand why there has been so many studies done. The cities believe the other studies were inaccurate, or perhaps so accurate that it's very uncomfortable to have to deal with such awful pollution that the solution is overwhelming. It's about time something was finally done with this, and it is a disgrace that this has been going on, and the company that caused all of it is getting away with it. And I firmly believe that they should be held responsible and pay for it, as they should Oakland Bay and the whole area around there. They're the ones that did it, they should pay for it.
Thank you, Patricia. Questions for Craig?
Craig, remember, check me right, there was an agreed order signed with the past commission 3 years ago. Are we in compliance with that agreed order?
Absolutely, 100%.
We've been in compliance with that agreed order for 3 years?
That's correct.
Thank
We
you.
have been giving updates, and we are fully in compliance.
Thank you.
So just to regurgitate some things you mentioned, we should have a plan completed by end of the year.
Should be submitted for review
You-
to Department of Ecology by the end of the year.
Thank
That
you
is
for
correct.
clarifying that. And if the DOE buys into that or tweaks it and back and forth, then it'd be time to implement that plan and after they approve it.
That's correct.
That's correct, okay.
And just for public information, then, there is no higher authority in the state of Washington than the Department of Ecology.
Correct. For this particular event. Or
I'm not
cleanup
talking-
plan, correct.
Yeah, so, I mean, I remember when we started this, we stepped up and we did our part and obeyed the law and went along with the program. And I'm just happy to see this was something that we stepped up, and we are seeing it through to the nth degree of the law that we are under. So, I mean, it's not like, you know, we just stepped up and did the right thing, and it's, you know, I think that I'm good to see that it's getting done, so.
We certainly are making sure that we follow through when we get a plan to fix something or clean something up, whether it be a project or whatever it might be. We are definitely committed to following through with it.
Okay. Anything else for Craig? Okay, thank you, Craig. All right, and back to you, sir, for a contract amendment for the West Downtown design.
So, Mayor, council members, this was brought to you the last meeting for approval. One thing that we failed to identify was the total amount that was identified on the contract was minus the 10% design that we told you about, explained to you that we had some unused portion of that, but it really should have been included in the total contract amount, the 10%, since it was just rolled into an amendment and it was not identified in there. So basically the total amount was short by about $35,000 in that overall, I think, $206,000 that is now identified. It was only identified as $171,000. So just a calculation error that we wanted to bring to your attention and get authorization and approval to move forward with that at the full amount of the $206,000, of which $35,000 was the 10% design that has already been completed.
Okay. Questions for Craig? Okay, seeing none. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to authorize the mayor to sign the corrected supplemental agreement number 1 for design of the West Downtown project.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. We have a motion and a second to authorize me to sign the corrected supplemental agreement number 1 for design of the West Downtown project. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Craig.
You're welcome.
Okay, next item, action item is interlocal agreement with the PRTPO. City Manager Jeff Knight will share the details.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm not going to try that acronym at all. This program was presented to you at our last council meeting as a new interlocal agreement for the Regional Transportation Planning Organization that has been in effect since 1990. We do have a current council member as a representative on the board. Deputy Mayor Peterson serves in that role. And we also participate in the technical advisory committee that looks at transportation planning for the entire region. The major change from what has happened from 1990 to today is that WashDOT was the coordinating agency previously, and they are turning over those duties to Kitsap County's Department of Transportation. Be happy to answer any questions. There's no changes from what you saw previously. And we would recommend that you move to approve the agreement.
Okay, any questions for City Manager Knighton? Okay, hearing none, do we have a motion?
I move to approve the ILA with Peninsula Regional Transportation Planning Organization as presented.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second to approve the ILA with Peninsula Regional Transportation Planning Organization as presented. Those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, last item is back to City Manager Knighton for the wastewater treatment plant update.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Director Gregory can jump in and correct me if I say anything wrong. I would appreciate that. I don't like being wrong on camera. But last night we had a power outage, as some of you experienced at about 11 o'clock. When that affected some of our wastewater treatment plant operations. We had an alarm go off at about 11:30. We've had our consultant parametrics out at our sites and our locations to make sure that everything is operating the way it ought to be operating since about 2 this morning. And he was out here for almost all day today, trying to make sure everything stays the way it ought to be, and we don't violate our discharge permit or our existing permit. One of the options that we looked at due to failure of our server that had failed about 3 weeks ago, and we had put it back together and tried to make that work for a short term until we could update the system the way the council had budgeted last year. We were exploring that. The events last night just made us move more quickly to replace all of that equipment and upgrade that equipment to the way that we ought to be operating at a future level, and will carry us through for the next several budget cycles and keep us in compliance with our permit. Unfortunately, we weren't able to put together a full briefing packet for you, but because this was budgeted and it's something the council was aware that needed to have happen, we wanted to take this opportunity, rather than spending money on an interim fix, to use that money in the most appropriate fashion and upgrade our systems that will serve the city of Shelton and our citizens long into the future. We have a couple of items here. First is there's a budget of between, and we got a very wide range for this number, but our parametrics consultant, the one that's been out here from 2 in the morning until probably late this afternoon, I'm not quite sure what time he left, of between $50,000 and $75,000 to build the software conversion to deploy all the equipment elements. $7,100 for IT components to host the new server. $9,100 for 13 new SCADA nodes, and those are PCs that control all of our sites. And then $50,000 for a Wonderware software licensing program, and for that price, that better earn the name. Between $6,000 and $8,000 for a top view dial out, and that's basically the alarm system that goes with it. We would request that budget authority from you tonight. Like I said, most of that was already budgeted. There was $100,000 already budgeted for these upgrades. It's a little bit higher than we anticipated, but we will be able to fund these through the current budget, through current line items within the same fund. We have, just to keep you up to date, we have to have 24-hour monitoring at the moment until we can get this fixed. We only have 4 individuals on staff that are capable of doing that monitoring, that have the appropriate licenses to do it. That means for the foreseeable future that those folks will be working a lot, and overnight and overtime that they don't expect. What we heard today from our consultant was that we have a best case scenario of getting all these new components and systems programmed and up and running of 15 days, and a worst case of about 25 days. That's assuming everything goes the way we planned it, and we all know that happens every time. So the problem is that 25-day window falls directly on the 4th of July weekend, which will likely extend it if we hit that timeline. But we do want to relieve as quickly as possible our staff members who are going to be working that significant amount of time. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, and I'm sure Director Gregory would as well.
Member Kranz?
Yes, I have been informed of a little bit of information that may be beneficial to the city. And that's that we probably need to keep track of any costs that the city may have incurred by this power outage, because it appears it has something to do with Bonneville and something that happened. There may be money for us to get reimbursed on these costs. So, you may already know all about this. Look at how wise he is. I thought I'd come in here with a radical, great plan, and he probably already had it, right?
I'm only wise about this because Director Gregory told me about it a little while ago. So,
you're saying he's
basically,
wiser than you are?
well, on this.
On this. Well, then I don't need to go any farther, but it is good that this, I mean, whenever there's a chance of
Yeah.
recouping money for something.
We are keeping track of all the fuel quantities that we're using at the moment to run the generator, to maintain the integrity of the wastewater treatment plant. We have reached out to WCIA to see if, what insurance opportunities there are available, and we're monitoring who steps up and takes the blame. So as soon as we know when that happens, we'll gladly say thank you.
And this wasn't just the wastewater treatment plant, this also took down our water system in certain areas, also Capitol Hill in particular. So it was fairly widespread collective chaos for a while today, but
But it didn't burn pumps up or anything like that?
no, basically just took down communications, so we really were flying blind of what we had going on out in the field was really the problem that we had, so.
Yeah. And we,
That's that server that you showed us on the tour that we walked on the right side, you said if this thing goes down, we're screwed?
That happened last night. Yeah.
I'm sure you're already on this too, but you might want to, just a suggestion, keep track of all the overtime involved. Yeah,
absolutely.
Any other questions?
just in case.
Jeff, what'd you say we had in the budget for this, for the standard replacement?
100,000.
100,000.
Okay, thank you. And this includes, I think you mentioned there was gonna be some fiber optic work needed, some,
That also includes this. Yeah.
okay. Any discussion on this?
I think it
Not sure what the motion should be, but,
I think that we will bring you back a full briefing package, but I think the motion at this point ought to be, we grant, or council grants the emergency authority to expend these funds at this time, and then we'll bring more formal information back to you so that there's a full accounting of what we spent.
okay,
So moved.
okay.
Second.
Jeff, is there any way that we can authorize either yourself or the mayor to sign any of those contracts? We're gonna have one coming.
That's true, too. I apologize.
I'd rather bring-
And authorize myself or the mayor to sign the contracts when the final language is agreed upon. If that's an amendment that
So
you'd
moved.
like to make. Okay?
Now you gotta remember all that, Bob.
Who's our secretary here? Did you get that motion, Donna?
Huh?
Okay. Would you like to read it back to us, please?
Council grants emergency authority to move forward with this project, and also authorize the mayor or the city manager to sign contracts.
Okay,
I'm
And
not
just
sure
a
it's project.
And just a comment that while I do not, as a rule, hope that we authorize large purchases or contracts outside of our regular three-touch rule, in this emergency circumstance, I appreciate that we're moving forward in a path that's going to be the most efficient and financially responsible, so thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And I, just as an aside, I would recommend that you amend that motion just slightly to designate the mayor to sign and not myself.
sure.
So moved.
That's not my signature.
That's what I do.
Okay, you accept that amendment?
Yep.
Okay. And I was gonna propose another amendment to specify as discussed tonight, because you went through
That's fine.
some numbers. I know they're approximate, but that's,
Yep.
I think that's our expectation, is we're close to these numbers.
I believe that's correct, and I have those numbers also for the record.
Okay, right? So, you got that all? Okay, you wanna read it again then, please?
Okay. Council grants emergency authority to move forward with this project. They also authorize the mayor to sign the contracts when they come in, and also specify the numbers that were shared tonight.
Okay, we good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have, it's been amended, so do we have a second on that?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Do you have more for a report?
Administration reports, just real quickly. I did want to mention that we are kicking off the community cleanup event that we introduced at the Spotlight Shelton on May 1st. First weekend for that will be July 12th and 13th. And we'll continue through right to the end of August. We wanted to get done prior to Labor Day so that the schools could open on time and teachers could get back in their classrooms and get those all fixed. We've had great cooperation from Mason County Garbage and the Shelton School District, which we very much appreciate. Yeah.
Oh, you done? Go ahead.
Oh, I got another one, but
I was gonna make a suggestion that we somehow in our newsletter, let people know that everything that we see today is out there 10 days ago.
Yep.
I mean, what I see, they can see. All they have to do is go onto the city website and go into our packet, and there it is.
Yep.
And if people don't have computers, maybe we can have something down here, a book down here.
We do have,
We do on that day, like 10 days out?
that same day.
Okay.
Up at customer
Then,
service, it's there.
So,
we have one at the library as well.
okay,
Yes.
well,
And the other item, just tagging on to that, we discussed quite some time ago, but any item that's introduced during one of our public meetings, also adding those after the fact, because oftentimes we have presentations and handouts, and making sure we're making those readily available as well.
that'd be great.
Absolutely.
I just think that if people don't know that it's there, I mean, everything I'm seeing today, they can see as well, so.
Next item I wanted to mention, I did mention it at our legislative thank you a couple hours ago, but we got the YMCA submittal, the formal submittal today, and so we'll start working on that right away. What else? Oh, the other item I had was the appointment to the community. I wanted to turn it over to Chief Moody to talk a little bit about crime trends over the last couple of years. We had the annual report that was prepared and given to council several weeks ago, and wanted to.
Let me talk about commercial vehicle enforcement too.
No.
I think I stepped out right about that time.
Yeah.
Timely
Too late, it passed you by.
Don't want any more equipment?
No, I don't want to do that. So thank you, council, for letting me speak a little bit on the 2018 annual report. We got behind a little bit in records this year between the state and us, and so we just got it out to you last month. There were some questions and concerns about some of the crime rates and statistics you've seen in there. I can address some of those today and give you some thoughts on that. But before I do that, I wanted to throw a couple of highlights out there that were in this too. This year, we were able to, without any funding from, advanced funding, I should say, from the council or otherwise, sponsored another Reserve Academy. As we know, 3 years ago, we did a Reserve Academy. We hired 6 out of the 7 reserves that are now full-time officers with us. This academy resulted in 4 new reserve police officers with us, and we partnered with Thurston County and Yelm in that. As of January of 19, we also have 3 full-time school resource officers, which is pretty unheard of in a town this big, to be able to have 3 full-time school resource officers dedicated to the schools. Our teams last year handled over 13,000 calls for service. This is over 3,000 calls for service more than we've handled in 15, 16, or 17. Those were 10,000 a year plus. Last year was 13 plus. We did this with the same amount of staff we've had since I've been here. While we received less 911 calls, and you can see that in the report over the year, the call volume resulted in approximately 700 more police reports and 400 more arrest reports generated through records. Speaking of records, our records team, and Donna can attest to what a bear these are, our records team also responded to over 1,900 public records requests last year. 1,900 public records requests came through just the police department. Due to retirements and unfilled positions, we hired 5 police officers in 2018. And in today's world, that's a pretty big deal because hiring is becoming its own chore. To have 5 people, one from a neighboring agency that had 12 to 15 years experience that decided to walk out the doors and come to us was a great accomplishment. With that in mind, our average tenure with Shelton Police Department is about 5 years. Out of our 19 officers, I've hired 11. So that tells you that they got less experience or less time here than I do, which is less than 5 years. So about the crime part of it, almost 5 years ago when I got here, I began speaking to any service club that would listen, community organizations, every group I could go to about the importance of calling the police department. I would constantly hear in my conversations, there's really nothing you can do about it. It was just a bicycle in my front yard. It was just a lawnmower out of my garage. I didn't want to bother you guys are busy. And I drilled into this community, call. Because if you don't call, we don't know what's happening in your community. And then I hear about it later, about, well, you know, I've had several things stolen out of my yard, or I've had this happen to my car, but we don't know about it. And we can't address those issues. So that part of the crime increase in the calls for service, you're welcome to blame on me. Because I think that just goes to show you with 3,000 more calls for service that people are calling, they're paying attention. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. I think some of these crimes were occurring and we didn't know it. The other part of that is that, well, I was reminded by one of the community groups that I spoke at recently of that very statement just a couple months ago, that you already told us this was going to happen. But there's other things that would go on with this. This is just one piece of the crime rate. Obviously, there's no magic answer to this. As a nation, we haven't figured out an answer to this, so I can't figure it out at this level. But I tell you, the other pieces that I see in this community are poverty, narcotics, mental health, and of course, our jail crisis. And as you read the report, I did get on a soapbox in one page of an editorial of what that jail crisis has shown for the city of Shelton. Just some real quick numbers to throw out to you there. We compare 3 years with our annual reports, 2016, 17, and 18. And some of those, suspicious activities is one of those in particular. That's when somebody just calls and says, we have a suspicious person on our street or suspicious vehicle on our street. Those increased by over 500 calls for service alone last year. And that's what I was talking about just calling us. Those can result, and often do times result, in some kind of contact with an individual or people and may result in arrest later. Our traffic stats went up quite a bit as well. It's interesting because, you know, people don't lump traffic in with criminal. There are criminal traffic offenses that occur. Driving with your license suspended, hit and run, those type all fall under crimes. Well, last year, the criminal traffic citations were almost doubled from what they were the previous year. Our officers wrote about 300 more citations in the last year than they had in previous years. And some of those fall under criminal as well. In addition, what we talked about with the jail crisis, and I'll read it real quick, just a portion of it, to give an easy perspective. In 2018, Shelton officers contacted people that had warrants through Mason County or other jurisdictions 594 times. In that 594 times, these people were not accepted for booking by Mason County Jail. That's 594 times that people could not resolve their case or put it into their warrant, and officers could not arrest that person. And that's just the ones we're counting. So if you, and I know you don't have it with you tonight, but I'm going to show you the page I'm talking about. It talks about drug enforcement, and I talked about that being a big piece of this. At the top of the drug enforcement, you will see adults arrested for, and then it gives you drug paraphernalia, heroin, marijuana, amphetamines, methamphetamines, prescription fraud. Those are your arrest stats. Underneath that, it says pending adult and juvenile investigations charges. And what that means, and that's even a more alarming stat than the arrest, because that is charges that could not be booked into the jail, but we had to release them on a citation or a promise to appear and are pending with the prosecuting attorney now. These are possession charges of all of those narcotics or sales of those narcotics. So that's how that is interpreted through there. And I can give you an idea that last year, or in 2018, our narcotics enforcement stepped up incredibly. And a lot of that due to the young men and women that we've hired that are eager to be police officers and go out and save the world. I mean, that's what they got hired for, to go out and do those things. And they're doing them. They're just having to get creative in how they end up enforcing it and arresting. And there are some concerns that people will see in there that the assaults have gone up, aggravated assault or assaults. And they have. There's no doubt. However, we also make sure we put into our reports our pie chart that shows the relationship to the offender. And what that tells us is there are a very, very small minority of those assaults occurring that are a stranger. In other words, a relationship with that victim, which tells me we have domestic violence issues, which tells me we have people putting themselves in places, in bad places at bad times with bad people. So again, I'd reiterate, overall, we're a relatively safe place to be. We have a property crime issue, we have a drug issue, and it's driven by a lot of those different things. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that come with it.
Questions for the chief?
I would just appreciate, you know, I was here when you were hired, And I just believe that you have done a phenomenal job for the city of Shelton. It's an honor and a privilege to call you a friend and a co-worker, and the challenges that your department and you face every day is beyond what we encounter. And so, thank you for being here. Keep up the good work. I don't care what those statistics say. I'm glad you're here.
I love being here. I'm going to stay here as long as Jeff will have me. But you know, as frustrating as it is for all of us to see these things with the jail issues, imagine what it's like for that line level person. They're seeing this on a daily basis going out there and not being able to do something about it. So that's where it really frustrates me.
It is frustrating.
Thank you.
How's the dog, by the way?
The dog will graduate the 21st of this month, as well as the handler, and we'll have him here.
So we having a party?
I'm sorry?
Graduation party?
We may.
Milk bones, just milk bones from everybody.
And we still have T-shirts and hoodies on sale for anybody who wants them to raise money for the equipment for the second.
Don't tell my wife that.
You know, those sweatshirts and T-shirts, when you wear them, they really generate a conversation. So they're cool to have.
Anything else, Jeff?
That's all I have.
Okay, any general comments for the second period?
No, there's not.
And nobody left.
All right. So, new items from the council for discussion tonight? Anything to add? Okay, seeing none, our next meeting will be June 18th at 6 PM.
Our next regular meeting.
Regular meeting, thank you. Thank you, Mayor, we are adjourned.